The Z890 Nova Wi-Fi Phantom Gaming, now with the 2025 BIOS update to get more performance out of the Core Ultra 9, 20 plus 1 plus 2 plus 1 plus 1, power phase delivery, a lot of exciting features, 5 gigabit Wi-Fi 7. Let's unpack. M.2. 10 M.2? That probably made the thumbnail. It's ridiculous. Okay, 4 are on an add-in card, and on the add-in card, each M.2 only has one lane. But you can blame Intel for the design of the chipset for that, because this motherboard has all the M.2 bandwidth on the motherboard, and then the breakout card, which is for bulk storage. Like, you can use bulk storage for 4 drives, 4 smaller drives. That's reasonable. It wouldn't make sense to put 4 expensive M.2. It'd be 4 cheap M.2. Anyway, let's take a look. Motherboards. 2 expansion slots. But look, it's got a rear I/O backplate, which is connected in the VRM area for cooling. Oh, and the chipset as well. It's a giant heatsink plate thingy with a quick release button. Well, I find that pretty appealing. Fun rainbow effect. It's the Nova, not like Nova Robotics. For this particular motherboard, they elected to put all of the M.2, all the PCIe lanes into M.2. We have an X16 PCIe 5.0 lane and an X16 X4 electrical through the chipset. You could put a larger card here. It's just going to use 4 lanes and it's going to be through the chipset. Everything here is Gen 4 except the primary M.2 up here at the top, which is Gen 5 direct to the CPU. Now, when ASRock says memory OC shield, what do they mean? That foil sticker right there. That helps reduce interference. And it sounds ridiculous, but that lets them have fewer layers on their PCB. So, yeah. But if it works, you know, if it works, don't knock it. You get the easy release for the GPU. You know, it's kind of wild. Premium brand motherboards, premium motherboards from other brands are starting to skimp on the easy release thing. And unless you're changing your GPU every other day, it really doesn't matter. But for people like me, it's kind of convenient. All right, let's take a look at the board layout. So you got dual 8-pin power for your CPU. You got dual 4-pin fan headers at the top edge here for your CPU cooler or whatever, but you got an extra 4-pin fan header here near the memory. Then you've got your 24-pin power connector. You got a digital LED readout. This is a real honest-to-goodness postcode and not on one of the most expensive motherboards that you can get, so kudos ASRock. Physical power and reset buttons, again, premium feature. It's pretty awesome. Type-C, 20-pin, 5 gigabit, another 20-pin, 5 gigabit, dual front 5 gigabit on this motherboard? Yes, you've got it. You got 4 6 gigabit per second SATA ports. At the bottom edge of the motherboard, you have a plethora of 4-pin fan headers. Looks like you got 4 right there. And your final fan header is hiding here at the back near your M.2, which could be used for M.2 cooling as well as rear fan cooling or whatever. You get a 50/50 RGB header, digital RGB headers at the bottom edge and top left edge of the motherboard, 2 there. Get some analog temperature sensor inputs, 2 USB 2.0 headers, and your analog front panel audio header. At the rear I/O, we've got HDMI out for the integrated GPU. We got our 2 Type A 5 gigabit ports, 2 Thunderbolt 4 ports, 2.5 gig and 5 gig LAN, as well as our Lightning USB. And then we got some 10 gigabit ports and 2 more USB 2.0 ports, optical SPDIF out, analog microphone in, and analog speakers out. There's a clear CMOS button and a BIOS flashback button. BIOS flashback is important because this generation depends on not just the BIOS, the management engine, then you have the Intel application optimizer, which you need to get from the Microsoft store, then you have the Intel drivers for the platform. There's like 3 or 4 of those. Then you've got, all of the other platform drivers, and that's what you need to get the maximum performance out of this thing. So as with all of these boards, we're going to do a build, but first let's finish up with the box. So you also get a premium Wi-Fi antenna. This is a movable Wi-Fi antenna on a wire, which you need for Wi-Fi 7. I mean, Wi-Fi 7 is line of sight for maximum throughput, basically. So being able to move your antenna really can make a huge difference. In the box, you've also got a lot of accessories, which we do need to go over. Your RGB breakout cable, your Y cable, your Phantom Gaming case badge, not 1, not 2, but 3 analog temperature sensors, your Phantom Gaming cherry style keycap, some M.2 mounting accoutrement. If you don't want to use the quick release, you can use the old Phillips style mount. Then we have this little enigma, this curiosity, this PCIe adapter. This is a 4-lane M.2 adapter that goes to 4 M.2. Each M.2 only gets a single PCIe lane. Yes, that will mean that your M.2 are not running at their full speed. You only get one lane. So, you know, one lane of PCIe Gen 4 is what, 2 gigabytes per second? So 2, 4, 6, 8 gigabytes per second is what you would get if this thing were fully loaded. This is about building a drive that is, you know, 4 1 terabyte drives, or 4 512 gigabyte drives, or 4 maybe 2 terabyte drives if those go on sale, and also the less expensive flash. You see, we're entering this era where the demand for PCIe Gen 5 means that there's more flash that only runs at slower speeds. The flash media itself has to be clocked higher in order to satisfy those PCIe Gen 5 speeds, at least when we're talking about M.2, where it's not like super wide. You don't physically have a lot of chips with a lot of layers to make up for that. And so that means that you have to bend the speed at which the memory runs. And so that means that you have companies like Team Group making their T-Create line, which are I mean, there are versions of that are TLC, so that's better endurance, but that is also not the fastest media. Those drives aren't really super fast in the first place, but they still have a fast interface, and so you don't really give up much running those kind of drives at Gen 1. And for game storage or bulk storage, it doesn't matter if it's a little slower. It's still faster than SATA. And you do get some SATA cables in the box, 4 of them, in case you wanted to fully populate the motherboard. This little thing is going to be a lot of fun. Notice that there's no heatsink or anything like that, because when the drives aren't running at their full speed, they don't really get super warm anyway. Neat! This is a new feature of the Intel chipset. Like a Z890 is able to do that. That is a brand new thing that is able to do. I also really like that for like the home server use case. So you could run 4 mechanical hard drives in like a RAID Z1 and then have a ton of M.2 storage. And even though this board is not a server board and doesn't have out-of-band management, we have done videos on things like the RISC-V, you know, Nano KVM and the Pi KVM, and the other projects that give you remote access. Even front panel connections, even you can connect the serial port on this and have serial port debugging through remote access. And so you may not need onboard out-of-band management, especially if you get a good deal on a motherboard like this. Actually, the Intel platform in general, I've seen it at discounted prices at like Micro Center, and that may follow, you know, in terms of global availability, because the Core Ultra 7 or the Core Ultra 9 would be a good choice for this motherboard. You could run Core Ultra 5 depending on what you find for this motherboard, but ASRock has some even more affordable boards that you're not really giving up very much, and I just like that this board came with that PCIe adapter. If you're not planning to run 10 M.2, you know, maybe check out the Steel Legend. I don't know. Let's get this on a bench and see where we go. Now, if this is your first rodeo building a machine, don't worry about it if the computer turns itself on and off a few times. That's really just part of the DDR5 memory training procedure. You'll get an error message eventually, and also that diagnostic code readout on this motherboard becomes super handy because you can see it's going through the initialization steps and you can see which one it gets stuck on, if it gets stuck, or if it turns itself on and off. That gives you some clues about, hey, just leave it alone, let it do its thing. It'll catch up with you in just a second. Let's go on a quick tour of the BIOS, shall we? There's not really a lot that's here that's a departure from what you would expect from the normal ASRock BIOS. They haven't really added a ton of extra stuff. Well, they actually have exposed a lot of knobs and tunables for the Core Ultra 7, and the memory subsystem, and the voltage regulation, and P-core and E-core control, including a very rare feature. You can set it to 0 P-cores enabled, although that didn't seem to work. Normally you have to have 1 P-core on all the time, but there's a really weird situation where on some of the older microcode, disabling the P-cores and running a game like Borderlands 3 on just E-cores would run faster than with P-cores and E-cores enabled, which was really bizarre. And so I was hoping that I could, for this video, do some experimentation with 0 P-cores. I actually did get it to post once, I think, but I'm not sure if it did a fallback or something like that and then re-enabled the cores, but I'd already spent too much time on this video, but I thought that that was interesting that that's still here in this newer BIOS. And this is the January 10th BIOS for this board. And so there's updates, new microcode, new management engine, the whole 9 yards. I wish ASRock made it a little easier to see what management engine version you're using, just so you could verify that you've got the latest version of the Intel management engine. But there is a screen for it buried in the BIOS, so you can look at the version number. But then it's a little tricky to know, hey, is this the actual latest version? So I feel like that could be just documented perhaps a little better. We're using our Kingston Fury 8200 CU DIMM, and it was a little problematic to get this thing to post at first. But once I got it to post, then setting the XMP profile and getting it to run at 8200 was no problem. There's also a built-in profile in this BIOS up to 9133. I don't have any memory that fast, so I can't verify that it works. But usually on the not top-of-the-line ASRock boards, the memory support sort of falls off a little bit. But 8200 being as stable as it is on this platform is very encouraging. And I wonder if it has anything to do with that foil sticker or not. Or probably. I don't know. It's interesting. The BIOS also has full bifurcation options. And so you can set it to X8, X4, X4. And that works for graphics card or anything else like that. And it's nice that it's not, 17 different options to describe the same thing. Interestingly, for the card that ASRock has that will let you run X4, X4, or X1, 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 X1 in X4 mode, there's a secondary option, PCIe 2, and you just say bifurcation enabled or disabled on that. It's been a long time since I've seen a 2-lane PCIe card. That was a thing in the PCIe 1.0 days, and to a lesser extent the 2.0 days. But 2-lane, Optane, older Optane, where it's like the H20, it's 2 lanes to the Optane device and 2 lanes to NAND, which is why those don't work on modern chipsets, is there's not a lot of M.2 lanes that can actually bifurcate down to 2x2 devices. And so maybe something like that would work here, but not on, like, those hybrid devices will never work on with just one PCIe lane. That's not a thing. I've seemed to have strayed from the subject somewhat. Now, in terms of performance, where is our 2025 performance? We're looking for single thread Cinebench scores being a little higher and gaming performance being a little higher. Well, I'm happy to report that, that 6 to 8% range over launch, this board can deliver it. It's not breathtakingly faster, it's not 20% faster, but it is a little bit faster. And this is really down to the optimizations that Intel has made, as well as updates to the operating system. And because the operating system updates are universal, well, it turns out that also benefits AMD as much as it benefits Intel. So the performance uplift between the two of them, they both have experienced a performance uplift since the end of 2024, since, August, September, October, somewhere through there for 2024 versus where we are at the time that I'm making this video, January in 2025. Intel is still working on microcode updates, and the BIOS updates and platform updates and driver updates are coming in quickly. And so things may change, but overall for a multi-core productivity platform, this is pretty good because you get 8 performance cores and 16 efficiency cores. And this is a reasonable board to deliver that performance. Did a lot of game testing with the 4090, and for 1440p and 4K gaming, yeah, it's a nice experience. If you want the absolute highest frame rate at 1080p, things have, improved, like I say, about 6% since launch of the Intel platform, but Intel is not currently the gaming leader in 2025. But for productivity and things that you use your computer to make money for, okay, sounds good. ECC UDIMMs. Like most of the other Z series motherboards, it'll post, but I can't get the EDAC driver to load in Linux. So ECC, not really much of a thing. 5 gigabit, that comes from Realtek, and then our E3100 NIC, that's 2.5 gigabit. That's an Intel solution, so you get the Intel 2.5 gig NIC with a Realtek 5 gigabit NIC. Not too shabby, really. All in all, ASRock has made some interesting choices in order to deliver this board. And like I say, if you're looking for an even more cost-down board from ASRock, you might check out the Steel Legend. But 10 M.2 connections, I really want to take a stab at maybe building a home server with this. I'd love it if we could just hack EDAC ECC support so I could run full ECC UDIMMs on this platform. But we'll get there. This has been a quick look at the Z890 Phantom Gaming from ASRock. There's also the new, less expensive chipsets, the B860 chipsets. Those are available. And I've got some motherboard reviews coming up for those as well. If you don't need all the features, that can make a lot more sense for the platform for running the Core Ultra 7 or the Core Ultra 9. This motherboard, I really would recommend an Ultra 7 or an Ultra 9. You'd have to have a weird use case to talk me into an Ultra 5. Maybe that home server use case where you just need a lot of M.2 because you're going to put in every M.2 you've ever owned just to have some network storage with the 5 gigabit. That's not terribly unreasonable given, you know, the target price point of this board, depending on where you are and some other options. But that B860 motherboard is going to be a significant cost savings, and the Steel Legend may be more appropriate because of it. You know, you don't need 10 M.2 lanes. So I don't know. Fun times. And you get a little bit of an overclock with this motherboard. Like 300 watts for your CPU, 325 watts, not really much of a problem, as long as you've got adequate airflow. I'm Wireless Level 1. If you want to chat about this board or show off your build or whatever, come hang out in the forums. I'm signing out, and I'll see you there.